This is the BBC. For details of our complete range of programmes, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
Welcome to the latest global news, compiled in the early hours of Thursday the 28th of December. I'm Janat Jalil with a selection of highlights from across BBC World Service News today. Coming up, the biggest prisoner swap in Ukraine in the years-old conflict. But what of wider hopes of peace?
I want to believe that people are tired of all this, of the conflict, and must find the strength to engage in a dialogue. Because without dialogue, we will be in a deadlock with no way out.
Japan lashes out after South Korea says a deal they agreed to compensate World War II sex slaves was inadequate.
I apologize for giving wounds of the heart to the victims, their families, civil society that supports them, and all other people.
A court in Bosnia sentences a Croat woman, known as the Mistress of Life and Death, to 14 years in jail for atrocities against ethnic Serbs during the Bosnia War. Also in this podcast, discovered at the bottom of a Scottish loch.
They are actually very impressive when you see them. There's bright, vibrant red colour, but crucially we shouldn't be able to see them because they live just within the sand themselves.
The world's largest colony of a brightly coloured but shy species of shellfish. And we'll hear from the first female referee in one of Europe's top men's football leagues.
The players admit that they act differently to a female referee because I think it's easier to verbalise abuse from a man to a man.
But first, pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine have handed over more than 70 prisoners. It's in return for more than 200 fighters captured by Ukraine's government. And it's thought to be the biggest prisoner swap since the conflict in eastern Ukraine began in 2014. Igor Kozlovsky was one of those returned from the rebel-held territory. He had been detained in Donetsk, where he'd been looking after his sick child. Speaking to reporters, he said both Russia and Ukraine had to find a way to resolve the crisis.
I want to believe that people are tired of all this, of the conflict, and must find the strength to engage in a dialogue. Because without dialogue, we will be in a deadlock with no way out.
This comes more than 2 years after a peace deal was signed. So does this signify progress towards ending the conflict? To get more on this, I spoke to our correspondent in Kiev, Anastasia Gribanova.
As of now, the swap has been completed and the prisoners on both sides are now returning home. The biggest stumbling block for this whole process was because the parties couldn't agree upon the lists of prisoners which they held captive. Initially, the plan was for Kiev to transfer around 300 separatists and to receive back 74 its servicemen and civilians. But as it turned out, not all separatists want to go back to the rebel-controlled territories.
Why is that?
The exact reasons are still unknown because the humanitarian groups are now talking to these people. But the wide thought is that because they might fear that they will be prosecuted or tortured as potential traitors when they're back on the rebel-held territories.
Now, you've talked about the stumbling blocks to this swap going ahead. Why have these stumbling blocks been overcome now?
Many like to think that it's because of the festive season, and it could be partially true. There have been months of negotiations, months of talks, months of cajoling, months of uncertainty which preceded all this swap. And although many believe that this formula, which we're talking about, like 300 separatists for 74 Ukrainian servicemen, is a bit unfair, it's a good thing, the Ukrainian government says, that things started rolling, that the process was launched, and it's a good coincidence it's happening ahead of Christmas and ahead of the New Year.
Now, this conflict began in 2014. Many people have been killed since then. Where are we now when it comes to the fighting?
As of now, there is the New Year ceasefire in place with some sporadic violations. The monitors point out there has been a reduction in shelling and shooting out there in the east, but the conflict is far from being over. If we talk in terms of the prisoners exchange, it's only one of the points of the Minsk peace deal which was signed between the sides of the conflict 3 years ago, and other much more significant and important steps needs to be implemented before we can talk about the peaceful resolution of the whole conflict in eastern Ukraine.
Anastasia Gribanova in Kiev. It's a highly contentious issue, the South Korean women forced to work in Japanese military brothels during the Second World War. Now, South Korea's foreign minister says the compensation deal agreed between the two nations in 2015 failed to meet the needs of the victims. But Japan has reacted angrily, saying any attempt to change the deal would be absolutely unacceptable. Sophie Long reports from Seoul.
The issue of so-called comfort women has caused rifts between the two countries for decades. The landmark deal, reached nearly 2 years ago, was supposed to finally and irreversibly resolve it. Japan apologised and paid into a fund to help the victims. But many people in South Korea refused to accept the agreement. They said it didn't go far enough in acknowledging the Japanese government's responsibility for the tens of thousands of women and young girls who were forced into sexual slavery. The 2-month investigation into the agreement between Japan and South Korea's previous government also found that parts of it were kept secret from the public. The South Korean foreign minister accepted that victims had been let down.
I apologize for giving wounds of the heart to the victims, their families, civil society that supports them, and all other people, because the agreement failed to sufficiently reflect a victim-oriented approach, which is the universal standard in resolving human rights issues.
Kang Kwon-wha went on to say that they would think carefully about any action going forward and how it would impact on relations with Japan. Ahead of the report's publication, the Japanese government said the agreement had been confirmed by both sides and it would continue to urge the South Koreans to implement it.
Sophie Long in Seoul. A court in Bosnia has sentenced a Croat woman to 14 years in prison for atrocities committed during the Bosnian War in the 1990s. Azra Basic was extradited last year from the United States, where she'd been living for 2 decades under an alias. I found out more about her from our Balkans correspondent, Guy Delaunay.
Well, Azra Basic served as a member of the Bosnian Croat forces during the conflict, and she was notorious in the area in which she operated. She was known as Bloody Azra by some of the people who were kept prisoner in the place which she was supervising, and she was also known as the Mistress of Life and Death, because these prisoners, which included prisoners of war and civilians, said that that was the power that she had over them. They said that she, in effect, tortured them, attacked them with knives, forced them to crawl over broken glass, and in one instance stabbed a man to death who'd been restrained at the time.
So how was she brought to justice?
It was on an extradition warrant which was brought by Bosnia to the United States, because Ms. Basic had been living in the United States since 1994. She eventually changed her name. She was known as Isabel Basic at the time as her arrest. She had also been known as Azra Kovacevic. She was quite keen to put her past behind her, and it was a long process to get the extradition warrant served, and then another 5 years before she was finally extradited in 2016. But the trial came about fairly quickly once that was achieved.
And how many more potential war crime suspects are the authorities still looking for?
It could be limitless, really. We've seen the Hague Tribunal come to an end, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia. That's finished officially now, closing on the 31st of December, although they've already had their closing ceremony. But there are local war crimes courts, national war crimes courts in Bosnia, Serbia, Croatia, and they're still prosecuting people. We've seen 13 people arrested recently in Bosnia for alleged crimes against ethnic Serbs during the conflict. But there have also been some disappointments. There have been people who were charged over a massacre during the war in the Serbian War Crimes Court, and those charges were dismissed. So that's the challenge which is now facing the prosecutors in those countries.
The BBC's Balkans correspondent, Guy Delaunay. To Myanmar now, where a court has extended the detention of 2 Reuters journalists despite international condemnation of their arrests. The journalists were detained 2 weeks ago while reporting on the Rohingya crisis in Rakhine State. They've now been remanded in custody for a further 2 weeks. Their court appearance was the first time they'd seen their families since their arrest. One of their wives spoke to reporters at the court.
I've been going crazy. I never expected anything like this, as he has never broken any laws in his life. I believe in his morality, and that's why I'm worried.
Reg Chua is the Chief Operating Officer of Reuters News. He's been speaking to my colleague Ben Bland.
Finally, after 2 weeks, their families can see them, their lawyers have had a chance to talk to some people. So That's the good news. They've been sent to instant prison, which we believe now means that they can get regular visits from their family and their lawyers. But really, there isn't a negotiation for their release in that sense. What's happening is that after these 14 days, the government will presumably decide whether or not to bring charges, and then we'll move forward from there. We, of course, are clear that they're innocent. They haven't done anything wrong. They're simply doing their job, and they should be released at once. It's great that their families can finally see them, but they shouldn't have been in jail in the first place.
And are you yourself in contact with the two journalists? Can you give any kind of reassurance about the conditions they're being held in, the way they're being treated?
Well, I mean, up until today, we had no idea how they were being treated or where they were being held. So, again, it's been wonderful that we've had a chance to see them. We've had very brief contact with them, but we've talked to their families, we've talked to their lawyers. They seem to have been in reasonably good shape. They're certainly in good spirits. They've reiterated their innocence. They had a chance to speak to some reporters. While Leung had a short statement where he said they'll face this the best they can because they've never done anything wrong. And of course, we agree with that. Wallung's wife spent about a half hour with him on the way to jail. She's, of course, really glad to see him. So far, they seem at least healthy and well.
How confident are you that they will be released?
Well, we don't think they've done anything wrong. So if you ask me, I would have said I'm very confident that they should get out. But obviously, we're dealing here with the Official Secrets Act in Myanmar, which is a law that's incredibly broad and vague, and pretty much anything that the government declares to be a state secret or endangering national security, can fall into that category. So I think it really is a question of how they interpret the law as much as anything else. One hopes, and with all the outpouring of support from across the world and in Myanmar itself, of people calling for their release, that the government will see sense and agree that they haven't done anything wrong.
Reg Chua of Reuters talking about his two detained colleagues in Myanmar. Now to a very murky case in Argentina, the death 3 years ago of a special prosecutor shortly before he was due to testify against the then President Cristina Fernández de Kirchner. The prosecutor, Alberto Nisman, had been looking into allegations of Iranian involvement in the bombing of a Jewish centre in Buenos Aires in the 1990s and allegations of a secret deal to cover up Tehran's involvement in return for a bribe. His death was investigated and a verdict of suicide was the result. But what actually happened on the night of his death? Celia Susterman is an Argentinian academic.
It was on a Friday that he published his denunciation, and on Monday he was due to appear in Congress to explain and to inform a commission, a Foreign Affairs Commission in Congress, about his revelations and about what he had discovered. And before that, then on the Saturday night, and again, this is not even clear whether it was Saturday night or Sunday morning, he appeared dead, and what at first seemed to be a suicide, but then immediately even Mrs. Kirchner said it clearly wasn't a suicide, somebody had killed him. And it was all very messy and unprofessional because the scene of the crimes, Nisman's apartment, was totally contaminated. There were like 50 odd people who were walking around the apartment. It was a scandal in itself, the way the scene had been contaminated and the whole case investigated. So 3 years ago, he was killed, and still some people maintain that it had been a suicide.
Now, in the latest twist, a judge in Buenos Aires has ruled that the death of the prosecutor 3 years ago was murder, not suicide, and one of his aides has been charged for being complicit in that killing. Celia Susterman says most Argentinians never believed the original finding of suicide.
It won't surprise people because nobody believed that Nisman had committed suicide. I mean, the way that the case was portrayed and the information everybody knew and what his former wife had said, there was no way anybody believed that Nisman had any reason to commit suicide. But now it's a judge for the first time that officially declares that this was murder and that he wants to charge Nisman's former IT advisor, with being complicit in the homicide, since he never denied this, provided the weapon from which the shot that murdered Nisman had come from. The former president has been now charged with treason, in the sense that she's accused of signing this secret deal with Iran to offer to drop the charges against the Iranian officials accused of the bombing in 1994 in exchange for commercial agreements and a supposed 10 billion loan from the Iranian government to Argentina. She has got immunity, and unless her colleagues in Congress decide to lift her privileges, then she cannot be prosecuted while she remains a senator.
Argentinian academic Celia Susterman. You're listening to Global News, the most important stories and the best interviews and on-the-spot reporting from the BBC World Service. Every weekend you can hear a review of the week's main news stories and why they matter. That's in the world this week, and the programme is also available to download from our website www.bbc.co.uk/programmes. Let's turn to Australia now, where a tit-for-tat row over China's influence in the country is escalating, with claims of espionage and infiltration souring relations between the two nations. Last week, Beijing issued a warning to Chinese students in Australia, saying they could become the victims of insults and assaults. So what's behind the dispute? Our Sydney correspondent Hal Griffith has been investigating.
Since the 1920s, Haymarket here in the centre of Sydney has been home to the city's Chinatown, a bustling mix of food courts, markets, pharmacies and jewellery stores, all geared towards Australia's large Chinese population. Many here today are students. More than 100,000 arrived in Australia last year, paying substantially higher fees than their Australian counterparts. And so, when some, like Sunny and Sylvia, see or hear something they don't like in a lecture, such as a map showing Taiwan as a separate state, they feel entitled to speak up.
I think for the Chinese students, they have the responsibility to the teacher this map may be wrong, and let the other students know this is not the whole Chinese map. Sometimes the teacher gave the other students a wrong opinion or wrong idea.
Yeah, I feel like it's good for them that they defend what they think is right. So I think that's really nice. And if I had the opportunity where there's like something I feel wrong about, I would be like fighting for it.
Complaints by Chinese students over the contents of lectures have been made at several Australian universities, and they've been controversial. According to Professor Bates Gill from Macquarie University, most are motivated by patriotism, but he says there's also evidence of more organised efforts to complain.
We've seen then examples of Chinese government effort to mobilize student opinion, whether that's through public demonstrations or to mobilize more in a more contemporary fashion, internet, and social media efforts to try and blast out the opinion that is most supportive of the Chinese viewpoint.
The row over the students escalated this week, with Beijing issuing a safety warning to Chinese nationals at Australian universities. But it's all part of a much wider debate over China's influence here.
And so we say, the Australian people stand up.
Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull turning to Mandarin to catch the ear of a Chinese audience as he defended new laws to clamp down on political interference, espionage and donations from abroad.
Chinese people stand up for their sovereignty, and they expect Australian people, and particularly Australian leaders, to stand up for theirs. That is why we respect each other.
China is Australia's biggest trading partner. It's an important relationship, but China's influence in politics has come under scrutiny after an opposition senator was found to have accepted cash from a businessman before lobbying in favour of China. He was forced to resign, but it's put the spotlight on every party's relationship with Beijing. Back in Chinatown, there are plenty of Chinese Australians who feel uneasy over the souring of relations, and they're suspicious over some of the claims being made.
been overestimated for the domestic political reasons. I think this is just something between their party struggles. They use this as an excuse.
I think that this is pretty common practice in China, but if you look at it from an Australian's point of view, it's corruption.
With trade relations so important, the Australian government will be anxious not to let this go beyond a diplomatic dispute. But it's also under pressure to prove to voters here that it's not under the influence of Beijing.
Hal Griffith in Australia. Now, it's a difficult, perhaps impossible job at the best of times. 22 players who all think you're biased against them, and potentially thousands of fans who probably hate your guts and blame you personally for their team's defeat. Oh yes, and all this while running a half marathon. I'm talking, of course, about the job of being a football referee. Well, imagine being the only woman referee in top-flight football. Top-flight men's football, that is. Bibiana Steinhaus is that person, and earlier this year she became the first woman to referee a match in Germany's Bundesliga, one of Europe's top competitions. My colleague James Menendez caught up with Bibiana Steinhaus and began by asking her what made her want to become a referee.
Actually, I didn't want to become a referee, really. I was playing soccer for a few years, which was, to be fair, not very successful. And then I was kind of dragged into refereeing. My dad is a referee as well. And so it wasn't really on purpose. It was more by chance. But from today's perspective, definitely one of my best decisions in life.
It certainly was. And what's the appeal? Why did you enjoy it so much?
It's this bunch of management tools which you have to go through. So you have to handle like 22 very, very different personalities. You have to communicate. You have to take decisions based on the laws of the game knowledge. And then you have to communicate these decisions verbally and also like by body language. And everybody is looking at you, not only in the stadium, also like under this microscope of media interest. And like this bunch of things makes it so challenging every weekend.
And so tell us then, what was it like that first Bundesliga match when clearly there was so much attention on you because of the novelty, plus the fact that it was your first Bundesliga match? Tell us about the lead up to that. How nervous were you?
The media interest in the first Bundesliga match was, I would say, ginormous. It was intense, and the build-up made it like kind of a huge mountain, like going on a mountain. My goal was not to focus on the media too much, just to ignore that a little bit and to focus and concentrate on my work on the football pitch. To be fair, the pressure was huge when I walked on that pitch where the president of our football federation was in the stands, where the media was all over, where Hertha BSC Berlin even sold like Bibiana Steinhaus tickets where female supporters could get into the stadium for half price and stuff like this. It was a lot of pressure, but the relief after the game was superb. Like, we were so happy that it went well and there were no big discussions at all. And actually the second game was even better on that note that it was no headline before the game started. Nobody was interested after the game that a female official has done this job. It was like totally under the radar, and that's how I want it to be.
How do you deal with, and it must have happened, certainly in all those lower league matches you must have refereed, and perhaps in the Bundesliga, but how do you deal with sexism, whether it's on the pitch or off the pitch?
I have been asked this question before, and I have to say I don't have any experiences with sexism in football from my perspective.
But didn't Kerem Demirbay of Fortuna Düsseldorf, didn't he say to you, women have no place in men's football when you sent him off? And you acted on that, didn't you?
I did. So Kerem Demirbay, in a second Bundesliga match 2 years ago, he was sent off the pitch and he got very emotional and said that women shouldn't be allowed to be on this football pitch. And he was booked by the federation afterwards. And I reported it because I thought myself, I'm working so hard for this value that men and women are equal. And in our society, on our continent, it should be that way. Men and women are equal. If you cannot handle it, you're not part of the game. Like, football is so colorful. Football is so wonderful for grassroots, for women, for disabled people, football is for everybody. And this is a great value and we should respect that.
Your day job is as a police officer. I read that you weren't able to go on patrol on the streets because you're so well known now. Is that true?
It is true. Like every aspect on the street just takes a little bit longer because people want to discuss like offside situations, penalty calls, and stuff like this. So I can't do that very much at the moment.
So what's next then for you? I mean, I imagine at some point you've got to aim for the top, and that's the World Cup, isn't it?
To be fair, I have been at the World Cup a few times, but at the female World Cup. So the men's World Cup, is it really a goal? My goal is, and it sounds a little pathetic, I know, but it's like doing every game in the best way I can. So it's really the next game is the most important game. And this is what you have to focus on, and this is what you have to control. And that's the most important.
Bibiana Steinhaus describing what it's like being the only woman referee in European top-flight men's football. Now, few ski resorts in the mountains of Europe can be certain of natural snowfall these days as winter temperatures rise. As a result, many alpine resorts are forced to rely on artificial snow. But as Bethany Bell now reports, one Italian resort has come up with a more environmentally friendly way of using it.
Skiing is a sport which takes a toll on the environment. Making artificial snow uses up a lot of water and a lot of electricity, which means big energy bills. But skiing is also crucial to the local economy, and this resort here in the Dolomites has figured out a way of reducing the use of snow guns and cutting energy costs.
We installed a very strong snowmaking system so we can produce the snow to cover all slope in 80 hours.
Georg Eissat, the president of Karetsa Ski, came up with the idea to cover the entire resort with artificial snow very early in the season, in November, when the temperatures plunged to -10 degrees. That way the snow lasts much longer, half a season or more. The snow's regularly spread around to ensure it doesn't melt, a process known as snow grooming. Georg says it's energy efficient.
With the grooming machine we saved about 20% of the gasoline, and with the snowmaking we saved between 20 and 30% of energy.
How much can you rely on natural snow here?
We need artificial snow to prepare the slope now with the modern style. We have flat slopes. We can't prepare the slope with natural snow.
A pumping station which draws water from a nearby lake to make the fake snow. The process guarantees skiing throughout the season. And Georg rejects criticism that the sport hurts the environment.
We save the water here and we give them back in the springtime. We spend the energy to prepare the slopes, of course, but many people enjoy the sport, and if they go in a swimming pool, it's the same. Also there you have to spend a lot of energy to prepare something to make happy the people.
That report by Bethany Bell. The world's largest colony of brightly coloured shellfish, known as flame shells, has been discovered in a stretch of water in Scotland. The reef, which is made up of hundreds of millions of the small clams, is in the west of the country in a sea loch called Loch Carron. BBC Scotland's environment correspondent Kevin Keane told me why this discovery was so special.
This is the largest colony of its kind, and it contains 250 million of these flame shells. And ordinarily, if you were a diver and you were at the bottom of the water there, you would not really be able to see these. You would see a carpet, a fairly dark carpet. But the flame shells themselves live about 5 centimetres below that. And we had this event earlier on this year where a dredger basically dragged all of its gear right along the surface of one portion of it, and it dislodged them, and then the flame shells themselves became visible. They are actually very impressive when you see them. There's bright, vibrant red colour, but crucially we shouldn't be able to see them because they live just within the sand themselves at this sea loch. And of course that's basically a fjord. It's part of the sea, and you've got the deep sides and the high mountains either side of them, and that's the kind of area where they live in. And then because of this event where the dredger disrupted them, Scottish Natural Heritage sent down divers to see, one, just how much damage there was, and then to try to establish just the scale and the extent of this reef. And that's when they made this incredible discovery, and the person who was in charge of that was Ben James from Scottish Natural Heritage.
We've surveyed what we believe to be the largest flame shell bed in the world in the Strome Narrows. It goes pretty much spans the seabed of the 5.5 kilometre tide-swept channel, and we believe it covers an area of about 194 hectares or 2 square kilometres.
So did this dredger, this fishing boat, cause much damage?
I think without any kind of local knowledge, this dredger went through the reef itself, and there are some quite horrific pictures that we saw from the dives afterwards which show lines, parallel lines, where the boat has gone up and down, covering the same ground and completely dislodging all of these incredible flame shells. And then we saw them scattered, broken on the seabed itself, and that's why the Scottish Government imposed a marine protected area status as an emergency at the time, as a temporary measure to ban from that point onwards any other boats from entering the ground and from carrying out any fishing work there. That's still a temporary measure, and because of this discovery, the Scottish Government has said that it's going to make this a permanent measure and to permanently ban fishing from this sea loch.
Kevin Keane on the discovery of the world's largest colony of shellfish in a Scottish loch. Sadly, no confirmed sighting yet of any monster. And that's all from us for now, but an updated version of the Global News podcast will be available for you to download later. If you want to comment on this edition or the topics covered in it, you can send us an email. The address is globalpodcast@bbc.co.uk. I'm Janat Jalil. Until next time, goodbye.